Stop what you are doing for 30 seconds, because the thing that brought you to this video was not curiosity, it was pressure. 3, maybe 4 days ago, something inside you started to push. Sleep became shallow, broken. You wake up at 3 in the morning for no reason at all and stare at the ceiling with your head spinning in circles around the same subject. Conversations you swore were already over have returned in their entirety. Old faces, a decision you have been putting off for months and which suddenly has stopped letting you be. And along with all this, a strange fatigue, the kind that doesn't go away with sleep, doesn't go away with coffee, doesn't go away with the weekend. You attributed it to work, to the weather, to routine, to a bad day that turned into a week, to anything except what it actually is. So I will be direct because I have no intention of stringing you along. This is not the moon coming down from the sky to mess with your life. This is your own internal structure colliding with a window that opens exactly now between June 29th and June 30th. What you are feeling is internal infrastructure demanding movement. It is a system that has been building up pressure and has found a date to discharge. And this is where most people go wrong, because feeling the window is not the same as knowing how to use it. In the next few minutes, I will show you the 9 mistakes that cause the overwhelming majority of people to waste this exact opening and come out of it the same way they entered. If you leave before the end, you will commit at least 3 of them without even realizing it. Stay until the end, because the 9th mistake is the quietest of all. And it is precisely this one that decides whether this week becomes a real turning point or just another one you watched pass by from afar. There is a comfortable lie that almost everyone believes, that inner work happens on the night of the full moon, that you need to wait for the sky to be round up there for something to start operating in here. That is wrong, and that mistake comes at a high price. What you have felt in the last few days, the emotions closer to the surface, the old memory that resurfaced uninvited, the fatigue that does not obey rest, is not pre-portal. It is the portal. The culmination does not arrive at the peak. The culmination is consolidated at the peak. They are completely different things. Think of a wave. You don't see the wave only when it breaks on the sand. The wave started forming way out there in the depths, long before you saw it. When it crashes on the beach, it is not being born. It is ending. The peak of the full moon is the breaking of the wave. But the water that rises in it has been accumulating for days inside you. Those who stand still waiting for the break miss the entire formation. And the formation is where the information is. That is why what has surfaced this week is already the material you will work with. The conversations that happened, the emotions that rose out of nowhere in the middle of a banal task, the uncomfortable perceptions you had about someone, about your work, about yourself. None of this is noise. All of this is the content of the window presenting itself in advance, so you have time to recognize it before it consolidates. Now pay attention to a division that will repeat throughout the entire video. Facing this exact window, humanity separates into 2 groups. The vast majority will feel all of this, the broken sleep, the intensity, the memory that returns, and will blame it on stress, on fatigue, on "I've been sleeping poorly." They will medicate the symptom and ignore the message, and for this majority, the window will open and close without anything changing. They will wake up on July 2nd exactly who they were on June 25th. And there is the minority, the people who have the internal infrastructure to recognize that the discomfort is not a defect to be corrected, it is a signal to be read. You did not come to this video by mistake. You came because you belong to the second category, or at least because part of you is tired of belonging to the first. Comment, you see a Janella. If you can feel that all of this had already started within you before you even clicked here, this is not for likes. This is you marking for yourself which side of this line you are choosing to stay on. The first mistake is the direct consequence of that lie, treating the full moon as an isolated event and spending the days leading up to it just waiting. It is the person who feels the pressure rising, realizes that something is moving, and instead of moving with it, they freeze. They decide to wait for the right night. They set aside a candle for today's ritual, and they let the last few days slip away in passive standby mode, the 27th, the 28th, with living material budding all the while, like someone standing in line at an ATM checking their watch. Those days do not come back. What remains is the peak of this night, the turn from the 29th to the 30th, and just the same, they are on the verge of wasting it too. The problem is mechanical, not mystical. When you wait, you are not neutral, you are suppressing. Every perception that rises and that you push down with a "I'll deal with this later" during the full moon is a perception that loses its sharpness. It is like writing down a dream 3 hours after waking up. What remains is a shadow of what it was. Let me give you a concrete scenario. A woman realizes on a normal Tuesday in the middle of a meeting that she has been swallowing resentment against a family member for 2 years. The clarity comes in full, out of nowhere, with a first and last name, and she thinks, "This is just the full moon energy, I'll work on this over the weekend." By the weekend, the clarity has turned into a vague, formless, bad feeling. She has lost the exact coordinate. She had the map in her hand and waited for the map to fade. It doesn't work that way. Conversations, emotions, and perceptions that arise before the peak are already part of the culmination. The peak only consolidates what you have recognized along the way. If you recognized nothing because you were waiting, the peak has nothing to consolidate. It washes over you like a wave over a rock, a lot of noise, no transformation. Air portal is not an astronomical event that happens to you. It is the turning point where the cost of remaining trapped in your current life becomes greater than the fear of taking the next step. And here is the part that no one tells you. You take the step first. The ground appears afterward, never before. Those who wait for the ground to appear before stepping remain in the same place their entire lives, calling their own paralysis spiritual patience. And this is exactly where I need to stop and be honest with you. Everything you are feeling right now, the restlessness that has finally turned into language, the shadow that insists on appearing, the signs that you can no longer pretend you don't see, is raw material of the highest quality. But raw material without structure becomes waste. It becomes yet another intense week that led to nothing. That is why I prepared Magia em 28 exercícios, as 28 chaves do despertar, a 28-day journey, an entire lunar cycle made for those who feel lost, different, or overwhelmed, and are exhausted from just watching their own life from the outside. It is not theory. It is not more content to accumulate. It is one exercise per day, one key at a time, transforming your restlessness into practical direction, your shadow into clarity, and your signs into real decisions. The link is in the first pinned comment right below this video. And before we continue, do just one thing. Comment the word começo. It is not just a word. It is you signing before yourself that this time the window will not pass you by. Now follow me, because the second mistake is the exact opposite of this one, and it is equally destructive. If the first mistake is doing nothing, the second is wanting to do everything. There is a type of person who, upon realizing a window is open, panics with abundance. They think, "This is it. I'm going to get rid of everything. I'm going to forgive my mother, leave this relationship, change careers, cure my anxiety, close every loop, and be reborn in a single night." They transform the portal into a spring cleaning of their entire existence. This is not spiritual ambition. It is sabotage disguised as dedication. Think about your body. If you have been sedentary for years and decide in a single day to run a marathon, lift weights, fast, and sleep for 3 hours, you will not wake up transformed. You will wake up injured. The system does not absorb transformation wholesale. It absorbs it retail, one load at a time, with integration time between each one. The emotional field works the same way. When you try to open all your wounds at once, none of them receives the attention necessary to heal. You only manage to bleed from all of them at once. The result is that feeling you might already know. The person spends an intense night, cries a lot, writes 3 pages in their journal, feels they've stirred everything up. And the following week, they are more confused and tired than before. They didn't process anything. They just stirred everything up and left it in a mess. The window has a capacity, and that capacity has a name. One theme, not 9, not those of a whole lifetime. One. The theme that has truly reached the point of closure, the one you already know, because it is precisely the one that surfaced the most this week, the one that hurt the most, the one that most refused to be pushed down. Your task is not to discover all your problems. It is to recognize which one of them has matured. There are things in your life that are still green, that it is not yet time to harvest, and that is okay. Trying to pull off a green fruit only hurts the tree and ruins the fruit. The window serves to harvest what is ripe, and there is always one that is riper than the others. Focus on that one. The rest will have their own season. Now, two mistakes that go hand in hand, because they both come from the same blindness, that of thinking the full moon begins and ends in itself. The third mistake is forgetting the seed. This full moon of June 29th and 30th is not a beginning. It is a continuation. Approximately 2 weeks ago, there was a new moon, a planting point. At that moment, even if you did not realize it consciously, some intention was sown. A decision began to form. A perception was born small, a whispered, "I can't take this anymore." The full moon is the harvest of that seed. It is the moment when what started microscopically becomes visible, undeniable, too big to fit under the rug. Those who forget the seed keep looking at the harvest without understanding where it came from. It is like waking up with a tree in your yard and being startled, without remembering that you yourself put the seed in the ground 2 weeks ago. So make this movement now mentally. What was being born in your life in the middle of the month? What decision began to take shape? What discomfort gave its first signs? Because that is the root of what is exploding now. And you can only work a harvest if you recognize the seed that generated it. The fourth mistake is demanding an exact result. This is one of the cruelest, because it makes the person give up just when things were working. It works like this. You had an intention. You imagined it would happen in a specific way. The person returns. The money arrives. The opportunity appears exactly the way you drew it in your head. Then the peak passes. That specific outcome doesn't happen, and you conclude, it didn't work. Nothing changed. It's all made up. Lie. What changed was deeper than the form you expected, and that is precisely why you didn't recognize it. Let me be concrete. A person asked during the new moon for a relationship to improve. They imagined reconciliation, conversations, flowers. What happened during the full moon was different. They simply stopped accepting being treated poorly. Internally, something unlocked. They didn't get the relationship back in the idealized form, they got themselves back. And since it didn't come wrapped the way they ordered, they called it a failure. They had the transformation in their hands and threw it in the trash because the packaging was different. Real change almost never arrives in the form the mind scripted. The mind wants the external result. The window delivers the internal realignment, which is what generates all external results later. Demanding the exact form is like planting an orange tree and pulling it out because you specifically wanted an apple. You ignore the entire tree because of an expectation. Quickly before moving on, because this here cannot wait. If you reached this point and felt every word hit the right spot, don't trust your memory for tomorrow. The intensity fades, the routine returns, and in 3 days, all of this becomes a vague memory of a good video I saw. Magia M28. Exercicios exists exactly so this doesn't happen. 28 days to fix into practice what this window opened. The link is in the first pinned comment. Decide now, not later. Later is where transformations go to die. Returning to the root of this, if the exact form is not the criterion, then what is? This is what the next error reveals. The fifth error is the most dangerous of all for your practical life, confusing intensity with clarity. When the window hits its peak, emotion amplifies. Everything gets louder, sharper, more urgent, and the human brain has a factory defect. It interprets intensity as truth. The stronger you feel something, the more you believe it is real, correct, and urgent. But intensity is not clarity. Intensity is volume, and high volume does not mean the music is in tune. At the peak of a full moon, a 5-year-old hurt might seem like a legitimate reason to end a marriage tonight. A frustration at work might seem like an unrefusable call to resign tomorrow morning. A limit that was crossed might seem like justification to burn a bridge that you took 10 years to build. Everything feels obvious, definitive, now or never. And here is the trap. Amplified emotion is valuable information, but it is raw information. It shows you where the pressure is. It does not show you what to do with it. Confusing the two things is like confusing the fire alarm with instructions on how to put out the fire. The alarm is absolutely right to go off, but if you act only on its sound, you run away in panic instead of grabbing the extinguisher. What to do with what rises at the peak then? Feel everything. Register everything. Write, speak out loud, let your body shake if you need to. Don't repress anything. That would be the first error all over again. But, and this but decides your life, do not execute irreversible decisions at the height of the intensity. This is the sixth error, making the definitive decision at the exact minute of the greatest emotion. The architect's rule is simple and saves relationships, jobs, and years of life. Feel at the peak, decide in the valley. The emotion that rises on the night of the 29th to the 30th needs to be honored as a sign and postponed as a command. You note the truth it revealed, and you execute the action a few days later, when the intensity has lowered and you can distinguish what was the permanent message from what was just the passing peak. If after 3 or 4 days the clarity remains, then it wasn't just intensity, it was direction. Act with all your might. But if it dissolves along with the emotion, you have just spared yourself the biggest regret of your decade. Decisions that destroy lives are rarely made in boredom. They are almost always made at the peak, with the absolute certainty of those who have mistaken volume for truth. Write down below which night is weighing heaviest on your field right now, 28, 29, or 30. This simple act of naming it already takes the emotion off autopilot and puts you in command of it. Now the mistake that erases in 48 hours everything the window has built. The seventh error is returning to the noise as soon as the peak passes. Most people treat the full moon as the end of the work. The night of the 29th to the 30th has passed. They did the ritual, and the next day they dive headfirst back into life exactly as it was. The phone in their hand before even getting out of bed, 3 screens on at the same time, conversation after conversation, notification after notification. They reopen all the taps of stimulation at once. But the portal doesn't end at the peak. The first days of July are the integration phase, and integration is where transformation is either recorded or lost. Think of an analog photograph. The image is captured in an instant, yes. But if you open the camera and let light hit the film before it is developed, the image vanishes. The capture happened, but you burned the record. Returning to the noise the next day is like opening the camera in the light. The experience happened, but you erased the result. What you perceived at the peak needs darkness and silence to become permanent. Every extra stimulus you add in these first few days is a layer that covers what was revealed. In 3 days of continuous noise, the clarity won at such a cost becomes that vague feeling of, I felt something that week, but I don't really remember what anymore. And from there, the 8th error is born. Not protecting any moment of silence during integration. I am not asking you to become a monk or disappear from the world. You have work, children, bills, life. I am talking about protecting small spaces of stillness. 20 minutes in the morning without a screen, a walk without headphones, a shower without a podcast, 10 minutes before bed with nothing but what you perceived. It is in the stillness that the nervous system archives. It is in the silence that perception descends from thought into the body and becomes a new way of acting. Without any silence, the entire harvest rots on the ground without ever being stored. The difference between those who change and those who just had an intense week is not in the peak. It is in who protected or didn't the silence of the following days. Now the part I need to tell you with the clarity that no one usually has the courage to use. Everything you felt these days will become one of 2 things, and only one. It either becomes real change, recorded in your way of living, or it becomes yet another window you watched close from afar, promising yourself that next time you will take advantage of it. And the difference between the 2 paths is not luck, it is not merit, it is not the universe choosing you. It is structure. It is having a clear path to follow when the emotion subsides and your whole life tries to pull you back to who you were. Magia em 28. Exercícios. As 28. Chaves do Despertar is exactly that bridge between what you felt and what you will live, and it is in the first pinned comment. Do not leave this video promising to check this later. You know what later means in your mouth. It means never. Open the first pinned comment now, before the next distraction erases everything you have just understood. And it is precisely about not letting this be lost that the ninth and final error deals, the quietest of them all, judging the portal of failure. It is the person who, at the end of it all, makes a hasty assessment. Life remains the same. I guess it wasn't really anything at all. They put the portal on trial and demand an immediate verdict, and since life out there hasn't reorganized itself in 3 days, they bring down the gavel. Failure. It was just another invention. Spirituality doesn't work. But internal transformation works in silence before it appears in motion. The seed that germinates underground gives no sign on the surface for days. Whoever digs it up to check if it is growing kills the plant. Judging the portal of failure because external life has not yet changed is digging up the seed to check you interrupt the very process that was underway. What changed this week was your internal point of reference. And when the internal point of reference changes, the external always follows, just not on the calendar that impatience demands. The person who unlocked self-respect during a full moon in June might only harvest the healthy relationship, the different job, or the peace months later. But it was in that window that the key turned. So let's close with the correct way to use all of this, not as passive hope, as conscious participation. 3 movements in order. First, review the seed. Look at what was being born in the middle of the month. Which intention, which decision, which perception started there? Recognize the root of the current harvest. Second, feel the peak without acting on impulse. Let the emotion rise in its entirety on the night of the 29th to the 30th. Record everything. And postpone any irreversible decision until the valley a few days later, when the intensity has subsided and clarity either remains or dissolves. Feel at the peak. Decide in the valley. Third, protect the stillness afterward. Defend small spaces of silence in the first few days of July, so that clarity descends from thought into the body and becomes a way of acting. This is swapping passive survival for conscious participation. It is ceasing to be someone to whom the window happens and becoming someone who uses the window. Most will do the opposite of each of these 3 steps and will leave here the same. You now know what they do not know. What you do with this starting tonight is the only thing that matters. And one last thing about not being alone in this. This video is not a standalone video. It is a coordinate within a larger map, the map of this cycle, this window, this year. If you are not subscribed, you will only receive loose pieces of the map without the sequence that gives them meaning. The next videos show what happens after this window closes, how to read the next one, and how not to lose the rhythm between one and the other. Losing the sequence is losing the context. Subscribe now to receive the entire map and not just fragments. And pay attention to this, because it is the point where most people turn off and miss exactly what mattered. Everything you have heard up to this point was the preparation. It was you understanding the terrain, recognizing the errors, receiving the coordinates. But the final revelation, what this specific window in June means for the life that is being born within you, and what comes immediately after it closes, is in the video that appears on your screen now. Click on it, not tomorrow. Now, while the field is still open and you can still feel what you felt during these minutes, the first 60 seconds of that video will show exactly what changes in your timeline starting this week. The wave is already forming. You have just learned not to let it break in vain. Do not get out of the water now.